Another migrant shelter in Chicago closes its doors.
The city of Chicago has closed 4 temporary migrant shelters.
Deadline looming for migrants to start being evicted from Chicago's shelters. Mayor Brandon Johnson is now saying it will be enforced, but there are still questions about where people will go.
The extreme migrant emergency situation in Chicago is getting out of control. Streets are filled with migrants, and with evictions looming over city shelters, Chicagoans are just witnessing the beginning of chaos. Many citizens worry for themselves and their families' safety. As shelters keep on closing, floods of potentially dangerous migrants are being let onto the streets and neighborhoods of the city, begging the question, how can the migrants stay in Chicago if they risk the lives of the city's residents? This bold step challenges the city's promise of shelter. With laws that guarantee shelter for those in need, the city faces a real test, managing this surge without turning its back on its citizens. It's a moment that asks, what happens when Chicago meets an immigration nightmare? And is Mayor Brandon Johnson up for the task? Stay with us as we delve deeper into Chicago's never-ending migrant crisis. Migrant Bus Arrivals.
State leaders say they've been told to expect up to 25 buses of migrants each day.
9 more buses carrying people arrived in Chicago today.
7 buses of migrants will arrive in Chicago today. This follows the at least 7 coach buses full of migrants that arrived in Chicago yesterday. In fact, just a few minutes ago, another coach bus full of migrants pulled up right beside us.
In Chicago, a dramatic and unprecedented situation is unfolding that has caught the eyes of the nation. Thousands of migrants are arriving in the city, being sent directly from the border. The city is now witnessing an overwhelming influx of buses filled with migrants. This influx isn't just a trickle, it's a flood, with thousands making their way into Chicago, challenging the city's resources, safety, and the patience of its residents.
In total, nearly $300 million has been spent since October 2022.
And how will the city keep funding the bill for migrants with $300 million already spent? And the worst part, the number isn't slowing down.
Immigrants demanding a piece of the American dream.
The marchers are also calling for help for the thousands of migrants bused to Chicago and stranded by the governor of Texas.
The arrival of these migrants has sparked a heated debate among Chicagoans. Many are questioning the decision to let them into the city in the first place, pointing to the strain on local resources and an increase in safety concerns. Stay around as we delve into the dire housing challenges in just a moment. It's not just a matter of logistics. It's about the character and future of the city. Critics argue that this situation is a direct consequence of the current administration's policies, often saying, that's what you get when voting for Democrats. Central to the controversy is Chicago's mayor, Brandon Johnson. His handling of the situation has come under fire, with many calling his approach inadequate and misguided. The criticism is sharp and widespread, with detractors arguing that Johnson's policies have not only failed to address the root of the problem, but have made the city a magnet for migrants, including those with criminal backgrounds. This, they argue, has directly compromised the safety and well-being of Chicago's residents. The visuals are striking. Buses arriving day and night, each one adding to the sense of a city under siege. It's not just about the numbers, though they are indeed staggering. It's about the impact on the city's infrastructure, its neighborhoods, and its very identity. Amid this chaos, questions about the city's direction and leadership are growing louder. The narrative is clear. Chicago is facing a crisis of epic proportions, with its government's response seen as lacking the foresight and strength needed to protect its citizens and maintain order.
I know folks may have questions about my style, but don't question my leadership.
This isn't just a local news story. It's a national drama playing out on the streets of one of America's most iconic cities. The situation in Chicago is being watched closely by people across the country, serving as a litmus test for the challenges and consequences of migration policies, city management, and political leadership. The overwhelming arrival of migrants, with the attendant challenges to safety and resources, has become a flashpoint for broader debates about governance, security, and the social contract in urban America. In simple terms, Chicago is at a crossroads, facing a crisis that tests the limits of its hospitality, its resources, and its vision for the future. The influx of migrants, including those with criminal backgrounds, has thrown the city into a state of uncertainty, with many residents feeling unsafe and questioning the decisions of their elected officials. The situation is dire, and the response from the city's leadership, particularly Mayor Brandon Johnson, is being scrutinized for its effectiveness and impact on the city's future. This crisis is a clear illustration of the challenges facing cities across the nation, making it a critical moment for Chicago and a cautionary tale for others. Housing challenges.
Thousands of migrants spending what could be their final weeks in shelters across Chicago as the city's eviction deadline looms.
Chicago is grappling with a housing crisis of unprecedented proportions as the city's streets have become the unwilling host to an expanding population of migrants. With shelters reaching capacity and facing imminent closures, thousands of migrants find themselves with no option but to set up tents and makeshift shelters on the streets. This burgeoning tent city phenomenon is not just an eyesore. It's a stark symbol of the city's struggle to provide basic necessities to those who have arrived en masse. As shelters evict occupants and shut their doors, the fallout is immediate and visible. The streets of Chicago, once bustling with daily life and activity, are now lined with tents. These makeshift homes spill over sidewalks and parks, transforming public spaces into crowded encampments. This situation has escalated to the point where the safety and security of Chicagoans are in jeopardy. The presence of so many living in such conditions raises serious concerns about health, sanitation, and order in the city. The safety of Chicago's streets has become a contentious issue, with many residents feeling increasingly uneasy about the change in their city's landscape. The surge in street-dwelling migrants, coupled with the lack of adequate housing solutions, has not only altered the physical environment, but has also contributed to a sense of insecurity among the city's inhabitants. This dire housing situation underscores a larger systemic failure to accommodate and integrate the influx of migrants into the urban fabric of Chicago. As the city scrambles to find solutions, the visible overflow of migrants onto the streets serves as a constant reminder of the challenges facing urban centers in managing such crises. The stark reality of thousands living in tents, vulnerable to the elements and the uncertainties of street life, has sparked a broader conversation about responsibility, resources, and the human cost of policy failures. Chicago is witnessing a humanitarian crisis unfold on its streets. The closure of shelters and the eviction of their occupants have pushed a vulnerable population into an even more precarious situation. The impact is felt not just by the migrants who are forced to live in squalor, but also by the residents of Chicago who are confronted with the consequences of this crisis daily. The challenge of housing these migrants is a litmus test for the city's ability to manage and mitigate complex social issues, and the current situation indicates a struggle to pass that test. Why are Chicagoans angry?
Brighton Park neighbors have been protesting this possible migrant tent camp location for hours now, even launching fireworks at one point. Residents we spoke with say they feel betrayed by city leadership and are concerned for their safety.
Anger is reaching a boiling point in Chicago, with residents directing their frustration towards Mayor Brandon Johnson and the Biden administration. The heart of their anger, the perception that migrants are prioritized over long-standing citizens, receiving resources and attention that many believe should be allocated to essential public services that benefit the local community. Safety concerns are escalating, making them a primary source of discontent among Chicagoans. The city's streets, once considered safe, are now areas of concern, largely due to the significant number of migrants, particularly males, among whom a substantial number have been identified as having criminal backgrounds. This situation has led many residents to feel their safety and that of their families is being compromised. The debate over the allocation of tax dollars further fuels the fire of dissatisfaction. Many Chicagoans see their tax contributions being redirected in ways that they feel do not benefit the community or reflect its needs. Questions about the city's priorities and the decision-making process at the municipal level are growing louder, with many demanding accountability and transparency. Education, a pillar of community development and growth, has become a contentious issue. The use of schools as temporary housing for migrants has sparked significant backlash. Residents argue that schools should be sanctuaries of learning and development for children, not shelters. This decision has led to concerns about the impact on educational quality and the overall well-being of students. The unease extends to Chicago's suburban areas, where the prospect of migrants settling in nearby has ignited a NIMBY, not in my backyard, reaction. This has led to pointed debates about the fairness of such policies and whether city officials would welcome these changes in their own neighborhoods. As the city witnesses the continuous arrival of buses filled with migrants, a pressing question dominates the public discourse. Why is this happening? And what implications does it hold for the future of Chicago? The city stands at a crossroads, with its residents voicing their grievances and seeking solutions to a situation that affects the very fabric of their community. Financial issues.
In total, nearly $300 million has been spent since October 2022.
The financial strain on Chicago due to the migrant crisis is reaching a boiling point, with taxpayers increasingly concerned about where their money is going. The city has reportedly spent a staggering $300 million to address the needs of the arriving migrants, a figure that continues to climb. This immense outlay of funds has sparked outrage among citizens who see their hard-earned dollars being diverted away from local services and into efforts that, in their view, exacerbate safety and security issues on the streets where they and their families live. The frustration among residents is palpable. They argue that the allocation of such significant financial resources towards supporting migrants not only strains the city's budget, but also detracts from essential services that benefit the broader community. Investments in public safety, education, infrastructure, and healthcare are perceived to be sidelined in favor of addressing the needs of migrants. This shift in priorities has left many feeling that their well-being and that of their community are being compromised. As the financial toll of the crisis mounts, so too does the scrutiny over the city's financial management and decision-making processes. Questions are being raised about the sustainability of such spending, especially against the backdrop of other pressing urban challenges. The figure of $300 million is not just a statistic. It represents a growing concern over fiscal responsibility and the long-term economic implications for the city. The discontent is further fueled by reports of increasing crime and safety concerns, which some citizens attribute to the migrant influx. The perception that taxpayer money is being used to fund initiatives that directly contribute to these security challenges adds a layer of complexity to the debate. The issue transcends mere financial management, touching on deeper questions of policy priorities, community safety, and the social contract between a city and its residents. Amidst these financial concerns, the call for transparency, accountability, and a reevaluation of spending priorities grows louder. Taxpayers are demanding more say in how their money is used, especially when the stakes, both financial and social, are so high. The unfolding situation places a spotlight on the delicate balance between humanitarian efforts and the fiscal and societal responsibilities of urban governance. As the city navigates these turbulent waters, the $300 million figure stands as a stark reminder of the cost of the crisis in more ways than one. City response. Mayor Brandon Johnson's response to the migrant crisis in Chicago has been marked by a series of controversial decisions aimed at addressing the immediate needs of thousands of migrants arriving in the city. Johnson has opened the city's doors, welcoming migrants as part of a broader humanitarian gesture and in alignment with his administration's commitment to inclusivity and support for vulnerable populations. This decision to let people in reflects a stance on immigration and sanctuary city policies, emphasizing empathy and support over exclusion. One of the most contentious actions taken by Mayor Johnson has been the allocation of public schools as temporary shelters for migrants. This move was intended to provide immediate housing solutions for the influx of individuals and families arriving with nowhere else to turn. The rationale behind using schools as shelters lies in the urgent need to address a rapidly escalating situation, utilizing available spaces within the city to provide shelter, security, and basic services to migrants. However, this decision has sparked intense debate and concern among residents, educators, and parents. Critics argue that transforming educational institutions into shelters not only disrupts the primary function of schools as centers of learning, but also raises questions about the safety, resources, and environment in which children are educated. There are fears that such measures could have long-term detrimental effects on the quality of education and the overall well-being of students. Furthermore, the city's approach, spearheaded by Mayor Johnson, has broader implications for Chicago's future. The significant financial burden of supporting migrants, coupled with the use of public resources like schools for shelter, has led to concerns over the sustainability of these measures. Residents worry about the impact on local services, infrastructure, and the city's economy, fearing that the current course of action may strain public finances, divert resources from essential services, and potentially deter future investment and development in the city. Critics also highlight the potential for increased tensions and divisions within the community, as the influx of migrants and the use of public schools as shelters could exacerbate existing social and economic inequalities. The decision to prioritize migrants in this manner has ignited debates over fairness, resource allocation, and the long-term vision for Chicago's identity as a welcoming but overwhelmed city. In sum, Mayor Brandon Johnson's actions in response to the migrant crisis while rooted in a desire to provide humanitarian aid and uphold the city's values of inclusivity, have ignited a complex discussion about the implications for Chicago's residents and its future. The decisions to welcome migrants and utilize schools as shelters, though well-intentioned, are viewed by many as potentially having far-reaching negative consequences for the city's social fabric, educational system, and financial health. Government response. The response to the migrant crisis from different levels of the U.S. government highlights a spectrum of perspectives and strategies, deeply influenced by political ideologies and visions for America's future. President Biden's stance. President Joe Biden has approached the migrant crisis with a more humanitarian and reform-oriented perspective, aiming to balance border security with the need to provide asylum and support to migrants fleeing violence and poverty. His administration has sought to undo some of the more restrictive policies of his predecessor, advocating for a more compassionate approach to immigration. This includes efforts to improve processing systems at the border, expand legal pathways for migration, and address root causes of migration in home countries. However, Biden's stance has faced criticism from both ends of the political spectrum. Some argue that his policies have encouraged the surge in migration, while others believe he has not done enough to ensure migrants' rights and safety. Former President Trump's stance. Donald Trump's approach to immigration was characterized by a hardline stance, focusing on reducing illegal immigration through stringent enforcement and the construction of a border wall. Trump advocated for closing the border to migrants and asylum seekers, arguing that such measures were necessary to protect American jobs, reduce crime, and maintain national security. His policies included family separations and the Remain in Mexico policy, which required asylum seekers to wait in Mexico for their U.S. court dates. Critics argue that Trump's policies were inhumane and undermined America's tradition as a nation of immigrants. Governor Abbott's actions. Texas Governor Greg Abbott has taken an aggressive approach to what he perceives as a failure by the federal government to secure the southern border. Abbott's stance and actions, such as Operation Lone Star, have focused on increasing law enforcement presence at the border, constructing barriers, and controversially buzzing migrants to Democratic-led cities across the country, including Chicago. Abbott argues that these measures are necessary to protect Texas residents from the consequences of unchecked immigration, including crime and economic strain. His decision to send migrants to cities like Chicago is seen as a political move to highlight and protest what he views as inadequate federal action on immigration. The differing responses from Biden, Trump, and Abbott underscore the deeply polarized nature of the immigration debate in the United States. Each leader's approach reflects broader ideological battles over the nation's identity, values, and responsibilities. As migrants continue to arrive in cities like Chicago, the debate over how to manage immigration, balancing security, humanitarian concerns, and the economic implications remains a contentious issue that defines and divides American politics. National impact. The migrant crisis, while acutely felt in Chicago, is not an isolated phenomenon. Major cities across the United States, including New York City, NYC, and Washington, D.C., are grappling with similar challenges. The arrival of migrants in these cities has put a spotlight on the broader implications for the country, revealing deep divisions in how Americans view the issue of immigration and its management. In both NYC and D.C., local resources are being stretched thin as officials scramble to provide housing, healthcare, and other essential services to the newly arrived migrants. Like Chicago, these cities have seen their shelters fill up and have had to look for alternative solutions, including the use of hotels and other temporary accommodations. The financial burden is significant, with millions of dollars being allocated to address the needs of migrants, funds that could otherwise support local services and infrastructure. The migrant surge represents a critical test for America, challenging the country's values, policies, and capacity to handle immigration in a humane and effective manner. As cities struggle to cope with the influx, the national debate over immigration policy has intensified. The situation underscores the urgent need for comprehensive immigration reform that addresses both the humanitarian aspects of the crisis and the practical realities of integration and support for migrants. The deep divisions in American society over how to handle the migrant crisis could indeed have a lasting impact on the nation's social fabric. On one side, there are those who advocate for open borders and the protection of migrant rights as a matter of human dignity and international responsibility. On the other, there are voices calling for stricter immigration controls, arguing that the unchecked arrival of migrants poses economic, security, and cultural threats. The cost of the migrant surge goes beyond the financial implications. It also encompasses the potential for increased social tension and division. The starkly different views on immigration policy have the potential to drive a wedge further into an already polarized society. This division is exacerbated by the portrayal of migrants as both victims in need of refuge and as burdens on the system, creating a complex narrative that fuels debate and discord. Looking ahead, the implications for America are profound. Without a cohesive strategy that includes securing the border and providing viable solutions for those seeking asylum, the country risks ongoing social and political strife. The migrant crisis highlights the need for a balanced approach that safeguards both the nation's security and its humanitarian values. The path forward requires dialogue, compromise, and action from all sides of the political spectrum to ensure that America remains a land of opportunity while also maintaining its sovereignty and social cohesion.